Hey guys, welcome back to the part 2 of the ultimate Japanese true crime Iceberg. In 2003, Fukuoka City became the stage for a horrifying crime committed by three exchange students who were struggling financially. What they initially saw as a quick way to make money quickly spiraled into a brutal massacre. The students became obsessed with a 41-year-old clothing retailer after spotting his Mercedes-Benz parked in the driveway. To them, the car symbolized wealth, and they assumed the house must be full of money. At first, they planned a robbery, but their mindset quickly shifted to a whatever-it-takes attitude, even if that meant murder. One night, they broke into the house through an unlocked window. Inside, they found the man's wife relaxing in the bathtub and drowned her on the spot. Moving through the home, they discovered the couple's young son asleep on the bottom bunk of his bed and suffocated him. Their daughter, however, was taken hostage. When the husband returned home, he was ambushed and forced to reveal his bank account PIN while he begged for their lives. But even after getting what they wanted, the students still murdered both him and his daughter. To cover up their crime, they weighed the bodies down with dumbbells and dumped them into the sea. The case came to light when a human leg was found floating in the water. Investigators quickly pieced together what had happened, and within days, the killers were located. Two of the students had already fled to China but were arrested there, while the last was caught in Japan. All three were sentenced to death. What began as a desperate plan for easy money became an act of shocking cruelty. By the way, if you want to feel the sheer panic and fear of seeing your family being taken away and being powerless to do anything about it, you should watch the movie Nocturnal Animals. You'll guaranteed get that gut-wrenching fear, and it happens pretty early in the movie. On the night of July 30th, 1995, three female employees at the NPE supermarket were murdered. Noriko Inagaki, 47, was the first victim. She was shot twice near the store's safe. Investigators believed she was attacked first because she wasn't tied up. The other two victims, 17-year-olds Megumi Yabuki and Hiromi Arai, were found bound with adhesive tape and shot in the head at close range. A friend who had come to pick up Noriko discovered their bodies and immediately called the police. At first, authorities thought the crime was a robbery. The two younger victims being tied up made it seem like a kidnapping. However, nothing was stolen. The store's safe was untouched, and all valuables remained in place. There were no signs of forced entry, making the motive unclear. That day was the last of a big 4-day sale at the supermarket, and the store had been busy. Witnesses later recalled seeing a suspicious man outside. Around 9 p.m., the store closed, and Noriko locked the doors. A few minutes later, she called her friend to pick her up. At 9:15 p.m., the store's security system was activated, locking the entrance, but shortly after, it was deactivated, and the doors were unlocked again. This suggested that the women were forced back inside at gunpoint. At 9:17 p.m., several people heard loud noises, later confirmed to be gunshots. By 10 p.m., Noriko's friend arrived, but she wasn't outside as planned. When he entered the store with a restaurant owner, they found the gruesome crime scene. Inside the supermarket's office, police found the three women dead. Noriko, still in her plain clothes as if ready to leave, was near the safe with burn marks on her skin from the close-range shots. Megumi and Hiromi were tied together with tape and shot execution-style in the head. The crime scene was strangely clean. Nothing was disturbed except for a single bullet mark on the safe. Investigators found about 10 footprints from two different shoes, as well as traces of iron filings, clay, and moss, suggesting the killer might have worked in metal or construction. The bullets used in the attack came from a Filipino-made Sanders Bingham .38 caliber handgun, a cheap imitation of a Smith & Wesson revolver. Despite using an inaccurate gun, the killer's shots were precise, leading police to suspect a professional assassin or someone with military training. The investigation stalled due to a lack of solid evidence. Over the years, various leads came up but led nowhere. In 2001, a gang member claimed an ex-soldier was responsible, but there was no proof. In 2003, a man arrested for an unrelated robbery had used a similar gun, but he denied involvement. In 2009, A Japanese death row inmate in China pointed to a former gang member from Fujian, China. This suspect was deported from Japan and later moved to Canada. In 2013, Japan successfully extradited him, but he had no useful information and the case stalled again. In 2010, Japan abolished the 15-year statute of limitations for murder, keeping the case open indefinitely. In 2015, police discovered a partial fingerprint on the adhesive tape used to bind the victims. It matched a deceased Japanese man who had worked in transportation and owned a white sedan, like the one seen near the store that night. However, the match was weak, so authorities couldn't conclusively tie him to the crime. In 2018, investigators released new details, hoping to identify a young couple who had shopped at the store before closing. They had bought ingredients for okonomiyaki and left in a white sedan. Police also sought an unknown woman whose cigarette butts were found in the office, as her DNA did not match any employees. The most likely motive was robbery. The MPE supermarket had poor security, and employees openly carried cash to the upstairs safe. Noriko, being the only one with access, might have been forced to open it, but refused. The younger victims were likely restrained to keep them from interfering. However, there were contradictions. Noriko's wallet was untouched, and a paper with the safe's passcode was left in plain sight. The gunman fired at the safe but didn't try to open it. Some believe the murders were a hit job rather than a robbery. The execution-style shootings, the precise aim, and the lack of stolen money suggest the killer had another purpose. Despite decades of investigation, multiple suspects, and international efforts, the case remains unsolved. The NPE supermarket was eventually demolished, leaving only an empty parking lot. In 2015, a shocking case unfolded in Saitama Prefecture when a police sergeant, weighed down by financial troubles stemming from an extramarital affair, crossed the line from law enforcement to violent crime. On September 3rd, the sergeant, whose job included overseeing autopsies, was present at a resident's home following the death of the man's father. While there, he noticed a safe, and instead of simply doing his job, he began meticulously planning a robbery. After studying the resident's schedule and movements, he returned the next day, broke into the house, and used ethanol to subdue the man before strangling him to death. With no struggle or resistance from the victim, the sergeant made off with over 1 million yen in cash, along with valuable coins. His attempt to commit the perfect crime fell apart when DNA evidence placed him at the scene, and multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing his car in the area. Once caught, the sergeant confessed during his trial that he had decided to kill the man because he believed robbing him without resorting to murder would be too difficult. His cold and calculated reasoning sealed his fate, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The Kobe child murders. In 1997, Japan was shaken by a series of brutal killings carried out by someone shockingly young, a 14-year-old boy. The case became infamous after a school janitor discovered the severed head of an 11-year-old boy outside the school gates. Inside the boy's mouth was a chilling note, leading some to believe the killer was trying to imitate the Zodiac killer. The violence started in February 1997, when the boy attacked 2 young girls on their way home from school, seriously injuring one of them, who was only 10 years old. The attack went mostly unnoticed. In March, he escalated, killing a young girl with a hammer and injuring another. Then, in May, the horror reached its peak. He murdered an 11-year-old boy, beheaded him, and left the severed head at the school gate. The note in the boy's mouth read, "This is the beginning of the game. Try to stop me if you can, you stupid police. I desperately want to see people die. It is a thrill for me to commit murder. A bloody judgment is needed for my years of great bitterness." By June, the killer was caught. When the truth was revealed, it shocked the nation. The killer was only 14 years old. Since he was a minor, he was sent to a juvenile medical training school rather than prison. After serving just 6 years, he was released on parole in 2004. As expected, the families of the victims and the people of Kobe were outraged. Many believed there was no way someone capable of such brutal crimes had been rehabilitated in just 6 years. Even after his conviction, some questioned whether he was the real killer. Some pointed out that the actual murderer was believed to be left-handed, but the convicted boy was right-handed. Another theory suggested the letter found in the victim's mouth was eloquently written, which some believed the boy wasn't capable of. Despite the doubts, he served his sentence and was released. Years later, in 2015, the now-adult killer published an autobiography. The book detailed his crimes in graphic detail and even seemed to express some regret. However, the families of his victims were horrified. They tried to stop the book from being published, but failed. The book became a bestseller in Japan. Then, as if that wasn't shocking enough, the killer created a personal website where he posted photoshopped nudes of himself along with bizarre, unhinged content. His behavior raised serious concerns. In what some saw as retaliation for his publicity and strange behavior, a tabloid decided to reveal his real name, location, and occupation. Despite his identity being made public, nothing happened. He vanished from the public eye, and to this day, no one knows what became of him. Meanwhile, the families of his victims are forced to live with the reminder of his crimes. His book still sits on store shelves, proof of his freedom, while they are left with loss and grief. In 1950, a poisoning case took place at Tokyo University, all because of a messy love life. An assistant professor was on his way to a celebration when he became the target of a deadly plan. The culprit was a dentist with a complicated romantic history, multiple affairs, a troubled marriage, and a reputation he desperately wanted to protect. The assistant professor had been threatening to expose all of his secrets, so the dentist decided to get rid of him. He poisoned a bottle of whiskey with cyanide and gave it to the professor as a gift. The professor drank it, quickly became sick, and died. At first, people thought it was just a heart attack. But one of his closest students wasn't convinced and pushed for a deeper investigation. That's when they found cyanide in the whiskey bottle. The dentist eventually confessed, admitting that he wanted to silence the professor before his affairs were made public. He was sentenced to life in prison, but his sentence was reduced to 15 years, and he only served 8. After being released, he changed his name and opened a new dental practice, starting fresh like nothing ever happened. Japan, like Korea, is very enthusiastic about learning English. This has created a high demand for foreign English teachers, making it a popular place for educators to work. Japan is generally safe and has a low crime rate, but people moving there, especially women, should be aware of cultural differences and safety concerns. One important thing to know is that some Japanese men have a strong interest in foreign white women, which can sometimes lead to uncomfortable or even dangerous situations. A tragic example of this is the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi, a man obsessed with foreign white women who brutally murdered British English teacher Lindsay Hawker. While this kind of crime is rare, it highlights the importance of staying cautious and aware. Ichihashi is also known for trying to change his appearance by disfiguring his own face to avoid getting caught, making his story even more shocking. While this case does not reflect life in Japan as a whole, it is a reminder that being in a new place always requires caution. Back in 2007, Lindsay Hawker's family and friends started to worry when she suddenly disappeared just days after March 24th. The last time she was seen, she was telling a taxi driver that she would be right back as she arrived at an apartment complex with a man. That same afternoon, her workplace noticed she hadn't shown up, which was strange because she was very responsible and never missed work without informing someone. At first, people thought it might have been a misunderstanding, but when her roommates realized she hadn't come home that night or left a note, they became seriously concerned. They reported her missing to the police, expecting a quick response, but the police didn't seem very interested. Since Lindsay was an adult, they assumed she might have just gone somewhere on her own. Days passed. Saturday turned into Sunday, then Monday, and still there was no word from Lindsay. Her roommates started panicking, especially when she missed work again. Her employers even reached out to her family, but they hadn't heard from her either. Then one of her roommates remembered something disturbing. Lindsay had mentioned a strange man who had been following her home, asking her for English lessons. Her roommate had a bad feeling that this man might be involved in Lindsay's disappearance. Lindsay was born in 1984 in England and was a bright, hard-working student. She studied biology at the University of Leeds and graduated with top honors in 2006. Even though she came from a well-off family and could have continued her studies, she wanted to explore the world on her own. That's why she moved to Japan to work as an English teacher. She worked at the Koiwa School, part of the Nova Teaching Company, and shared an apartment in Chiba with 2 other female English teachers to help with the high cost of living. Lindsay was dedicated to her job, loved by her students, and well-liked in her neighborhood. Even though she was far from home, she stayed in touch with her family, friends, and boyfriend through emails and video calls. Her encounter with Tatsuya Ichihashi began on March 20, 2007, after work. As she was heading to her bike, Ichihashi suddenly appeared, claiming to be one of her students. But Lindsay knew he was lying. He was too old and completely unfamiliar. She tried to ignore him, got on her bike, and rode away. But to her shock, Ichihashi started following her, on foot. He kept jogging and running to keep up with her bike. Lindsay pedaled faster, feeling scared, but he didn't stop. When she finally reached her apartment, she felt somewhat relieved, thinking she could scream for help if he tried anything. Out of breath, Ichihashi apologized for following her and insisted he wanted English lessons. It was a strange request. Who chases someone home just to ask for tutoring? Lindsay firmly said no. Inside the apartment, her roommates were surprised to see her with a random man. But Ichihashi wouldn't leave. He claimed he was exhausted from the chase and asked for a glass of water. Maybe feeling sorry for him and knowing her friends were nearby, Lindsay let him in. While inside, Ichihashi again asked for lessons, this time offering to pay her $32 per hour. Lindsay was already earning well, but the extra money was tempting. After thinking about it for a moment, she agreed. Before leaving, Ichihashi gave her a drawing of her face that he had made, which seemed creepy. He also wrote down his name and phone number. Her roommates thought the whole thing was strange, but since the meeting was supposed to happen in a public place, they didn't think it was too risky. Later, Lindsay told her family and boyfriend about this strange encounter, admitting that the man had seemed creepy, but that she had taken the tutoring job for extra savings. After getting permission from her employer to take on a side job, everything seemed set. On March 24th, Lindsay and Ichihashi met at a cafe in Tokyo. CCTV footage showed that Lindsay acted professionally, while Ichihashi seemed to invade her personal space. After the lesson, Lindsay expected to be paid immediately, but Ichihashi said he had forgotten his wallet at home. He suggested they take a taxi to his apartment so she could collect her money. Shockingly, Lindsay agreed, even though he was basically a stranger. When they arrived at his apartment, Lindsay told the taxi driver to wait because she would be right back, but she never came out. After waiting for about 5 minutes, the driver left. That visit to Ichihashi's apartment would be her last. Lindsay's father, Bill Hawker, flew to Japan with her boyfriend Ryan to help with the search. Ryan had an important piece of information. Lindsay had mentioned a stalker to him. Her roommate also still had the piece of paper with Ichihashi's name and number on it. When they gave this to the police, they immediately recognized his name. Ichihashi had a criminal history, including robbery and sexual assault. His wealthy father had previously paid a huge sum of money to one of his victims, allowing him to avoid jail. With this new information, the police feared that Lindsay had met a tragic fate. On March 26, 9 police officers went to Ichihashi's apartment. They saw movement inside and noticed a strange, large plastic bathtub on the balcony. Suspicious, they decided to wait and ambush him. At 7 p.m., Ichihashi suddenly opened the door. He was barefoot and carrying a backpack. When he saw the police, he panicked and ran. Shockingly, even with 9 officers chasing him, he managed to escape. The only thing they recovered was his backpack, which contained gym clothes. Back inside the apartment, they found a horrifying scene. Women's clothes and underwear scattered around, and the bathtub on the balcony filled with sand. Inside, they found Lindsay's body. She was naked, bound, and gagged. Her hair had been shaved off and her body had bruises. The autopsy revealed she had been strangled so violently that her neck cartilage had broken. She had also been sexually assaulted. Lindsay's body was sent back to England, where a heartbreaking funeral was held. Her parents released doves in her memory, and many people gathered to mourn her. Meanwhile, in Japan, the police were under massive pressure to catch Ichihashi. He disappeared, hiding all over Japan for years. He even lived in an abandoned World War II bunker on a remote island. During this time, he worked in construction to save money for plastic surgery. Desperate to change his face, he even tried to perform surgery on himself, cutting parts of his lips and reshaping his nose. After years on the run, police finally caught him in 2009. In 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison. Even in prison, Ichihashi remained a disturbing figure, writing a book about his time as a fugitive and profiting from it. However, all proceeds were later given to Lindsay's family. Lindsay's murder remains one of Japan's most tragic crimes, serving as a painful reminder to always be cautious, no matter how safe a place may seem. Johnny Kitagawa was one of the most powerful talent agents in Japan, often compared to Hollywood figures known for their influence over the entertainment industry. For decades, he was responsible for launching some of the biggest boy bands in J-pop history, running an agency so successful that it was often called a boy band factory. However, behind the success was a deeply troubling reality that many have since spoken out about. Allegations against Kitagawa date back to the 1960s, with numerous former trainees stating that he took advantage of his authority over young hopefuls. Many aspiring stars believed that working under him was the only way to have a successful career, and some felt pressured to endure mistreatment in silence. His control over the media was so strong that early attempts by individuals to speak out were largely ignored or suppressed. Kitagawa's company was known for its strict rules, closely managing every aspect of its idols' lives. This level of control made it difficult for those affected to come forward, and Japan's cultural attitudes towards shame and reputation only added to the silence surrounding the issue. Many victims kept their experiences to themselves for years, fearing backlash or career ruin. Even after Kitagawa's passing, more individuals have continued to share their stories, finding the courage to speak up. Some former trainees have expressed complicated emotions, acknowledging both the harm they suffered and the career opportunities they were given. Now, if you're too innocent to not have figured it out by now, I can't say much here, but I'll just give a little piece of information. He didn't hurt people at a time. He used to switch rooms and go back and forth between different rooms and trainees each night. Personally, I recommend watching a friend's compilation after this to wash your brain. The next case raises serious questions about justice. The Hiratsuka apartment 5 bodies case is a disturbing story filled with disappearances, suspicious deaths, and even suspected incest. In 1984, a 6-year-old boy, T, was reported missing. His mother claimed he had been abducted by North Korea, but in 2006, 5 bodies, including T's, were found inside an apartment in Hiratsuka. Among them were Y, 35, and R, 19, who were half-siblings. At first, it was believed they had died in a double suicide and had been in an incestuous relationship. However, investigators later found a note from the mother admitting she had murdered her daughter R. Another note from Y said he wanted to die so he could be with R. The last time R was seen alive was in October 2005, when her social media activity suddenly stopped. Authorities also found troubling text messages where R complained about her mother and talked about wanting freedom. The mother was arrested for murder, and Y's death was ruled a suicide. However, because of the statute of limitations, she was never charged for the deaths of T or the 2 infants. In the end, despite being linked to 5 deaths, she was only sentenced to 17 years in prison. Joji Obara was born in Osaka, Japan, on August 10, 1952, with the birth name Kim Sung-jong. His parents were ethnic Koreans living in Japan. His father started from humble beginnings collecting scraps, but eventually became very wealthy, owning several properties. The family reportedly ran a taxi company, owned real estate, and even had a pachinko business. Growing up in a privileged environment, Obara attended elite private schools in Tokyo and Yokohama, including Takushoku Senior High School in Kanagawa. He was known to be a quiet and shy student. He and his siblings were seen as wealthy, sheltered kids. However, his father passed away when he was just 17, leaving them a massive inheritance. Some reports suggest their father left them around 40 million yen in assets across Tokyo and Osaka, making them millionaires at a young age. Obara then enrolled in a prep school that guaranteed admission into Gakushuin University through an affiliation program. He later graduated with a degree in law and politics. After university, he became a naturalized Japanese citizen and changed his name to Joji Obara. He pursued a career in real estate, while his two brothers became doctors. Finding his job dull and tiring, Obara turned to aggressive investments in real estate and the stock market in his 30s. However, the economic recession of the 1990s hit hard, crashing stock and real estate prices in Japan. Obara lost his business and most of his wealth, and creditors came after him for his debts. With his fortune nearly gone, he turned to crime to sustain himself. He started laundering money for the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, specifically the Sumiyoshi Kai group. Beyond financial crimes, Obara's behavior became more sinister. He kept his private life hidden, staying mostly indoors at his residence in Moto Akasaka Tower. He even banned his former employees from taking pictures of him. He was known to wear sunglasses during the day and had a nocturnal lifestyle, as revealed by his phone records. Despite losing much of his wealth, he still owned multiple luxury cars and flaunted his money. However, Obara also had a dark and disturbing obsession with women. Like many wealthy men, he frequently visited Japanese hostess bars. Hosts and hostesses are paid to serve drinks and keep customers company, without any sexual services included. Some also accept paid dates outside their clubs, known as dohan dates. While these jobs can be glamorous, they are also risky. Obara was a regular at Casablanca Club, a high-end nightclub in the Roppongi district, where he targeted women, especially foreign hostesses. He had a particular interest in blonde Caucasian women and was known to have a fetish for unconscious victims. He would invite hostesses on dohan dates, but instead of just taking them out, he drugged them and carried out horrific assaults while they were unconscious. He would take victims to his properties, like his condo in Zushi Marina or Moto Akasaka Tower, where he used chloroform-soaked cloths to keep them unconscious. Some reports suggest he used a rope attached to a metal bolt in his ceiling to restrain his victims. Even worse, he recorded himself committing these crimes and labeled the tapes with the victims' names. When the victims woke up, they often experienced nausea and pain, both physically and psychologically. He would sometimes dress them back in their clothes and lie, saying things like, "You drank an entire bottle of vodka," or claiming there had been a gas leak. In 1998, Obara was arrested in Wakayama for disguising himself as a woman to enter women's restrooms and film them. He refused to cooperate with authorities and declined to have his mugshot taken. However, despite his predatory actions, he remained under the radar for a long time. That changed with the disappearance of Lucy Jane Blackman. Lucy Blackman was a 21-year-old British woman who had worked as a flight attendant for British Airways. When her visa in Tokyo was extended, she decided to work as a hostess at Casablanca Club in Roppongi, alongside her friend Louise Phillips. On July 1, 2000, Lucy went on a dohan date with a man but never returned or contacted anyone. Lucy had been offered a prepaid phone and an invitation to a beachside restaurant. She left her apartment wearing a black dress and a silver heart necklace, planning to meet Louise and their friend Scott Fraser later that evening. She made a few calls to Louise that day, but after 7 p.m., she was never heard from again. The next day, Louise received a phone call from an unknown man who claimed Lucy had joined a cult and would not be coming back. This alarming message set off a widespread search. Lucy's father, Tim Blackman, and her sister Sophie flew to Japan to find her. At first, the Japanese police did not take Lucy's disappearance seriously. They suspected she might have overstayed her visa or disappeared intentionally. Many foreign women working in hostess clubs suddenly quit and left without notice, so the authorities believed Lucy had done the same. Out of the 300,000 legal foreign workers in Japan, 1/3 were in the adult industry, and the police assumed Lucy had fallen into trouble there. However, Tim Blackman refused to accept this and pushed the police to investigate properly. Even British Prime Minister Tony Blair got involved, urging Japan's Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori to make finding Lucy a priority. A breakthrough came when another hostess reported a suspicious encounter. She said she had gone on a Dohan date with a man who took her to a seaside area with palm trees. She lost consciousness during the date and woke up feeling unwell. The police realized the only place in the region with palm trees was Zushi Marina in Kanagawa. Investigators visited Roppongi and spoke to other hostesses, who were initially scared to talk due to visa concerns. However, several women eventually came forward, describing eerily similar experiences. Going on a Dohan date near the sea, blacking out, and waking up the next morning with no memory. 5 days after Lucy's disappearance, on July 6, 2000, the police received a tip from a property manager about a noisy tenant the previous day, Joji Obara. Officers visited his apartment and found him sweaty and shirtless. Inside, they noticed chunks of cement and gardening tools. When they asked to check the bathroom, he refused, acting agitated. However, there was not enough evidence to arrest him yet. Investigators then looked into residents at Zushi Marina who owned luxury cars. Obara's name stood out, especially when they realized he had used a fake name, Piyohara, which in Japanese kanji could be read as Obara. With criminal records and victim testimonies matching his profile, police arrested him at 7 a.m. on October 18, 2000. Obara did not resist, as if he knew his time was up. After his arrest, police searched his properties and found evidence: alcohol, drugs, a personal notebook, and hundreds of videotapes documenting his assaults. Watching these tapes was horrifying for investigators, but none contained footage of Lucy. Despite overwhelming evidence, Obara denied all allegations, claiming that the women had consented because they were paid. He also denied knowing Lucy Blackman. The search for Lucy ended tragically on February 9, 2001, when Inspector Tadashi Naito discovered her remains. Her body had been dismembered into 8 parts and buried under sand, with her head encased in concrete. She was found in a seaside cave in Miura, Kanagawa, near one of Obara's properties. Unfortunately, Lucy was not Obara's first victim. Before her, another foreign hostess, Karita Ridgway from Australia, had gone on a Dohan date with him. However, he used too much chloroform, causing her to suffer seizures and eventually die. Hiroaki Hidaka's life started off pretty normal. He did well in school, but didn't have any clear goals or ambitions. Over time, he drifted into bad habits, gambling, drinking, and addiction, things he kept hidden because he wasn't proud of them. Eventually, he became a taxi driver. It seemed like he was getting his life together, but in reality, he resented the businessmen and professionals he drove around. He felt like he was better than them, yet they had money and success while he was drowning in debt. Then he got married and started a family. But instead of being a fresh start, things took another dark turn. His wife suffered from severe postpartum depression and decided to take their baby and stay with her family until she felt better. This left Hidaka feeling abandoned and depressed, and instead of trying to fix his life, he spiraled deeper into his vices. Desperate for money, but unwilling to work for it, he turned to a sugar daddy website, where older men pay younger women for dates. But Hidaka was broke. The first woman he met had to cut their date short, saying she needed to pay 100,000 yen bill. That gave him an idea. He assumed she had the money on her, and since he owed 150,000 yen in debt, he figured if he killed her, he could take the cash and almost pay off what he owed. So he murdered her. But there was a problem. She didn't have the money he expected. All she had was 50,000 yen, which meant she barely had anything beyond what he had already given her. His plan had failed, but instead of stopping, he kept going. At some point, his wife found out about his massive debts and filed for divorce. That didn't stop him either. He kept using the website to lure in women, killing them in the same way, figuring he would eventually get caught and executed anyway. He had no concern for his victims or the lives he was destroying. What finally led to his arrest wasn't the website, it was his own arrogance. He decided to target a friend of a friend, someone he knew had money. But unlike the other victims, this woman realized what was happening and fought back. She still didn't survive, but her disappearance could be traced back to him. When she was reported missing, the police linked Hidaka to the crime, and he was arrested. He was convicted of murdering 4 women and sentenced to death. In Japan, crimes against women are often ignored. A BBC documentary revealed that gender-based crimes are widespread, but victims hesitate to report them out of fear of shame. Many still believe sexual assault is not real, and this idea is strong in Japan as well as in other Asian countries. Making things worse, certain types of adult videos even glorify these crimes, which makes it harder for victims to seek justice. Sexual assault can happen anywhere, from private homes to public places like the subway. A common crime in Japan is chikan, where men take advantage of crowded trains to grope women. This sets the stage for the case we're going to discuss today, the horrifying story of a Japanese university club that was secretly created to target female students. This is the Super Free incident. Universities in Japan have various clubs, ranging from hobby-based groups to extracurricular activities. But shockingly, some clubs have existed for the purpose of sexual assault. At first, it may seem impossible that people would willingly join such clubs. But in reality, these groups exist, hidden from universities and the public. Of course, they don't openly advertise their crimes. They disguise themselves as normal social gatherings while secretly targeting female members or even random women. Since victims often stay silent, these clubs are difficult to uncover. One of the most well-known cases of this type was the Super Free Club. Super Free was originally a social club at Waseda University, an elite school in Japan. The university is known for producing politicians and business leaders, but its prestigious image was tainted by this scandal. The exact moment when Super Free changed from a social club into a criminal group is unclear. However, things took a dark turn when a student named Shinichiro Wada became the club's leader in 1995. Wada originally wanted to attend the University of Tokyo, Japan's most prestigious school. However, after failing to get in, he set his sights on Waseda University and was accepted. Once at Waseda, he joined Super Free. The club had a reputation for throwing wild parties with lots of women. Wada quickly became a popular figure within the group and eventually took control. Under his leadership, Super Free expanded beyond Waseda, recruiting members from other elite universities in Tokyo. Super Free's main activities included hosting large parties, particularly in the Roppongi district, a popular nightlife area. But behind the scenes, these events were a cover for their crimes. To keep their illegal activities hidden, Wada instructed members to sell party tickets only to trusted people and new university students. From the outside, Super Free seemed like just another university club. But in reality, it was highly organized, with multiple branches, employees, and even an office in Tokyo. Reports suggest that Wada earned about 10 million yen, $100,000 a year from these events. But money wasn't their main goal. Women were. Super Free specifically targeted young women, especially those from smaller universities. These women believed that attending these parties would introduce them to Tokyo's high-class lifestyle. However, the reality was far more sinister. Super Free members had a set routine. First, they held large rave parties where guests drank heavily. They encouraged certain women to drink until they were completely intoxicated. Then, they took these women to bathrooms or other secluded areas where multiple men would assault them in turns. The club functioned like a pyramid scheme, where members were expected to participate in assaults to prove their loyalty. Wada himself promoted these attacks, saying that those who refused weren't true members of the group. The assaults didn't just happen in club bathrooms. Victims were sometimes taken to alleyways, stairwells, hotels, or even members' homes. The perpetrators spiked drinks with strong alcohol, sometimes up to 90% alcohol content, or drugs to knock victims unconscious. To prevent women from reporting, members took photos of the assaults as blackmail. One member, Kishimoto, was responsible for keeping victims quiet, ensuring they didn't resist or seek help. Because of these tactics, Super Free operated for years without being caught. It is estimated that around 100 women were assaulted by Super Free members, and about 50 men participated. Some offenders admitted to attacking women 15 times, while others claimed they only did it once or twice. However, the true scale of their crimes is unknown. The case finally came to light due to 3 specific incidents. December 19, 2001, Wada and 2 other members assaulted a 19-year-old college student at his residence. April 2003, Wada and 12 members assaulted an 18-year-old near a Roppongi club before taking her to his home for further abuse. May 18, 2003, Wada and 4 members attacked a 20-year-old college student at the same Roppongi location. Despite there being over 100 victims, only Wada and 13 other members were arrested, and only these 3 cases were officially prosecuted. Many victims refused to file formal complaints, possibly fearing retaliation or blackmail. Wada was sentenced to 14 years in prison, while the other members received sentences ranging from 28 months to 10 years. However, Wada's sentence was reduced because his father offered financial compensation to the victims, though only to those involved in the 3 officially reported cases. Even after being convicted, some members had the audacity to appeal their sentences. Wada's appeal was denied by the Tokyo High Court in 2005, and later, Japan's Supreme Court also rejected it. Despite being sentenced to 14 years, Wada was released early on parole in 2017. He changed his name and now lives in Osaka. This case led to changes in Japan's sexual assault laws, including the introduction of a gang sexual assault charge. Before the revisions, the minimum sentence for robbery was 5 years, but for sexual assault, it was only 2. This highlighted how the legal system valued property more than human dignity. Shockingly, some officials made disgusting comments about the case. In 2003, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yasuo Fukuda said that some women act like they want to be assaulted. When criticized, he later claimed his words were misunderstood. Additionally, Japan has a long history of problematic media representations of sexual violence. For example, in the 1990s, an anime called Rape Man featured a superhero who assaulted women as a form of justice. This anime was widely consumed and still has fans today. Some experts believe that Japan's defeat in World War II left many men feeling powerless, leading them to seek control through such media. While this is only one perspective, it highlights deeper issues in how some parts of Japanese society view women. Sachiko Eto seemed like an ordinary woman living in Fukushima. Her early life was tough. Her father died when she was young, leaving her to fend for herself. Still, she pushed through, got a job, fell in love, got married, and had kids. It seemed like she had built a stable life. But things took a turn. Her husband was injured in an accident and developed severe back pain. On top of that, he had gambling debts. Then their daughter got sick. Struggling to cope, they turned to a religious group that claimed prayer could heal illnesses. To their surprise, her husband's pain disappeared. But not long after, so did he. He had an affair with another member of the group and left. Now abandoned and stuck with a mortgage, Eto prayed for her husband to return. But during one of her prayers, she felt something strange, a supernatural experience, or so she believed. Convinced she had a spiritual awakening, she decided to start her own cult. She began reaching out to people from her past, offering them guidance and emotional healing. In reality, she was just listening to their problems like a therapist, but to her followers, she seemed to have a special gift. Soon, she had loyal believers who lived with her and treated her like a savior. At first, the commune was peaceful, but as Eto gained more power, things took a dark turn. She met a new man in the cult, fell in love, and together they started enforcing strict rules. They controlled food, sleep, and even bathroom use, all under the guise of purification. Those who spoke out were punished. She called it an exorcism, her way of driving out evil spirits. Over time, the abuse escalated. 2 followers died from the brutal treatment, but Eto told the others that God had taken their souls. Then more people started dying. The exorcisms included chanting and beating followers with drumsticks, supposedly to purify their spirits by destroying their dirty bodies. In reality, it was pure torture. As more followers died, the cult became a house of horrors. Eventually, police raided the compound, ending Eto's reign. She was arrested, convicted of 6 murders, and sentenced to death, one of the few women in Japan's history to receive the death penalty. The case revolves around customers of a dog shop who went missing and were later found to have been murdered. The killers burned the victims' belongings and dismembered their bodies, making it difficult to find any remains. At first, the cases were unsolved due to a lack of evidence, but a similar incident in Osaka led to a breakthrough. On April 21, 1993, a man named Akio Kawasaki went missing in Saitama Prefecture. His family reported him missing after he failed to return home. Investigators discovered that he had last visited a pet shop called Africa Kennel in Kumagaya before disappearing. The shop was run by a couple named Gen Sekine and Hiroko Kazama. Kawasaki had gone there to complain because the couple had sold him an ordinary old dog disguised as a rare Rhodesian Ridgeback for a large sum of money. His car was later found near a train station, but he was nowhere to be seen. As police investigated, they found that 2 Yakuza gang members and a woman who also had connections to the couple had gone missing after visiting the pet shop. However, due to a lack of evidence, the investigation stalled. Then, in 1995, another case in Osaka, known as the dog lover murder case, raised suspicions about whether it was connected to the 4 missing dog lovers in Saitama. Reporters began investigating the Saitama case again, which led to renewed interest in the couple. Sekine was already known to authorities. He liked to brag about crimes, saying that if murder were an Olympic sport, he would win a gold medal. He once told a Yakuza acquaintance that he had killed 30 people and often shared venison with him, even though he had never hunted. Some police officers suspected that Sekine had actually been feeding human flesh to the Yakuza to get rid of evidence. Despite strong suspicions, there was no concrete proof, until an accomplice came forward and confessed. This confession revealed shocking details about the case. Sekine and Kazama had been well-known breeders of Alaskan Malamutes in the 1980s. However, after Japan's economic downturn, their business suffered, and they fell into debt after expanding their shop. To stay afloat, they began scamming customers by selling common dogs disguised as rare breeds at high prices. Kawasaki, who ran an industrial waste disposal business with his brother, became one of their victims. Sekine convinced him to buy 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks for 11 million yen, about $81,000 USD, claiming their puppies could be sold for a fortune. Later, Kawasaki learned from an acquaintance that he had been scammed. The dogs were worth no more than $760 each, and the male dog was too old to breed. Furious, he demanded a refund, even threatening legal action. Sekine and Kazama decided they couldn't give him his money back, so they planned to kill him. On April 20, 1993, they lured Kawasaki into a garage, pretending they would return his money. They gave him a capsule, claiming it was a nutritional supplement, but it actually contained poison they had obtained from a veterinarian. Kawasaki took it willingly and died. The couple wasn't alone in the garage that night. Their employee, Yamazaki, who worked as Kazama's driver, was there. He had left briefly to run an errand, and when he returned, he found Kawasaki dead. Sekine threatened him, even asking about his children's well-being to intimidate him into helping. Yamazaki, fearing for his life, agreed to help dispose of the body. He let the couple use his bathroom to dismember Kawasaki's corpse, then helped transport and dispose of the remains. A few months later, Yakuza member Yasutoshi Endo, who had previously helped Sekine with customer disputes, grew suspicious of Kawasaki's disappearance. Endo and his driver, Susumu Wakui, started asking questions and pressuring Sekine. This made them targets. On July 21, 1993, Sekine and Kazama invited them over, saying they would give them property documents as payment. Instead, they tricked them into taking the same poisoned capsule that had killed Kawasaki. Endo died quickly, but Wakui remained conscious for a while. Sekine panicked and lured him outside, pretending to call an ambulance. The poison eventually took effect, and Wakui died. Their bodies were also dismembered and burned. One more victim was yet to come. On August 26, 1993, Sekine targeted Chizuko Sakiguchi, the mother of a former employee. He convinced her to invest in the shop, then poisoned her too. This time, Sekine acted alone. In January 1994, police arrested a suspect in Osaka for a similar dog-related murder case. This reignited media interest in the Saitama case. Reporters flooded Africa Kennel, putting Sakine and Kazama under intense scrutiny. They denied everything. Meanwhile, Yamazaki was struggling with guilt. He made excuses to police but then suddenly disappeared with his wife. Authorities later found out that his wife had committed fraud, embezzling $384,000. Eventually, on December 3, 1994, Yamazaki confessed to everything and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. Thanks to his testimony, investigators were able to locate the victims' remains, leading to Sakine and Kazama's arrest on January 5, 1995. However, there were rumors of other victims. At least 3 people connected to Sakine had vanished in 1984, and police received multiple tips about suspicious deaths. During the trial, Sakine and Kazama turned on each other, each blaming the other as the mastermind. But the judge ruled that they had acted together. Both were sentenced to death. They appealed multiple times, but their sentences were upheld, with the final ruling on June 5, 2009. Meanwhile, Yamazaki, who had been forced into helping, received a 3-year prison sentence. He was released in August 1998. Sakine never admitted to his crimes. He remained fascinated by his ability to dispose of bodies. He had destroyed evidence in grotesque ways, cutting the corpses into small pieces, feeding them to fish, and burning everything else. He even bragged about his perfect crimes. However, karma eventually caught up with him. His health declined in prison, and he died on March 27, 2017. Kazama remains in prison at the Tokyo Detention House. Recently, this case resurfaced after a Buddhist monk shared a chilling experience with Sakine. As a university student, the monk, Miki, had visited Africa Kennel with friends. Sakine had offered him an easy job, walking dogs for a high salary. Miki was tempted but ultimately refused. Each time he visited, Sakine offered him a can of coffee, which he drank twice. On his 3rd visit, he declined. Years later, after Sakine's arrest, Miki learned that the suspect had been offering poisoned drinks to his victims. It was then that he realized how close he had come to death. Hiroshi had a disturbing condition known as paraphilic psychosexual disorder. In simple terms, he could only feel pleasure through acts that most people would consider deeply abnormal. For him, that meant strangling people, not just lightly, but to the point of death. His life quickly spiraled downward. He dropped out of university, then got fired from jobs. But instead of stopping, he kept going. Mo eventually turned to the internet, where he found a suicide club, an online space where people struggling with suicidal thoughts gathered to talk. He used this as a hunting ground, pretending to be a kindred spirit looking for a peaceful group suicide. In reality, he had no intention of letting anyone take their own life. Instead, he lured 3 people, a 14-year-old boy, a 25-year-old woman, and a 21-year-old man, by promising a painless death together using carbon monoxide in a car. But once they met up, he turned on them, strangling each of them to death after only a short conversation. After his arrest, Mo openly admitted that killing gave him pleasure. He even blamed his urges on reading mystery novels as a child. Dubbed the Lust Murderer, he was sentenced to death. His execution was carried out in 2009. Takahiro Shiraishi seemed like just another quiet guy, introverted, bouncing from job to job, never drawing much attention. But his loneliness ran deep. He eventually got involved in Tokyo's red light district, tangled up in shady business, and his reputation took a nosedive. Some people might try to rebuild their lives, but Shiraishi had other ideas. He turned to Twitter. And not just any part of Twitter, the darkest corners where people at their lowest searched for an escape. He posed as someone who understood them, someone who would help them log off from life peacefully. But he had his own twisted plan. His first victim believed he would help her end her suffering. Instead, he drugged, assaulted, and strangled her. Then, using instructions he found online, he dismembered her body. Later, when he ran into her boyfriend, he panicked, thinking he had been tracked. So he invited the boyfriend over and murdered him the same way. Over 2 months, he lured in 7 more women, promising them peace but delivering horror. He drugged, assaulted, and killed them, stealing their money afterward. Police got involved when multiple women went missing. Investigators followed an online lead about a man contacting women and eventually traced it back to Shiraishi. When they searched his apartment, they found a nightmare: bones, organs, and the severed heads of all 9 victims, stored in coolers and preserved with cat litter. In 2017, Shiraishi was arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to death. He remains on death row, awaiting execution. Getting married and raising a family is a huge responsibility. Couples have to take on the roles of both parents and partners, setting a good example for their children. However, the man in today's story did the opposite. His actions showed that he had no morals and was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. This case is about a man who appeared to be a responsible father and husband, but was actually hiding a dark and ruthless nature. On November 3rd, 1994, in Yokohama, Japan, a mysterious white plastic bag was found floating in the harbor. It was large, heavy, and tied to a rock to weigh it down. Residents nearby reported the sighting, and the Japanese Coast Guard arrived. When they opened the bag, they made a horrifying discovery: the body of a woman. Over the next 8 days, divers found 2 more plastic bags in the same harbor. Inside, they found the remains of 2 small children, both under the age of 2. It was clear all 3 victims were connected, likely murdered by the same person. Investigators identified the first victim as 31-year-old Aiko, a resident of Tsukuba, a city north of Tokyo. The 2 children were her 2-year-old daughter and her infant son. The prime suspect was obvious: Aiko's husband, 29-year-old Dr. Iwao Nomoto. Just days before, Dr. Nomoto had filed a missing persons report for Aiko and their children. When he was called in for questioning, he appeared shocked by the news. However, detectives noticed something suspicious. He had fresh scratches and cuts on his wrist. When asked about them, he claimed a dog had scratched him. Investigators doubted his story but had no concrete proof that he was responsible. The triple murder shocked the nation. As the media covered the case, details about Aiko's personal life surfaced. Rumors spread that she had worked in nightlife and had expensive taste. Some began to paint her as a bad wife and mother. Then police found Aiko's diary, which revealed she had been trapped in a troubled marriage. The diary showed that the real problem was Dr. Nomoto's infidelity. He had cheated on Aiko repeatedly, giving him a strong motive to kill his wife and children. When confronted with this evidence, Dr. Nomoto denied everything. But soon, police found CCTV footage of his car near the harbor where the bodies were discovered. On November 25th, 3 weeks after the first body was found, he finally confessed. Iwao Nomoto grew up in Ibaraki Prefecture and excelled in school. He became a doctor and made his family proud. He met Aiko at a tennis club in 1990 when he was a 25-year-old intern and she was a 27-year-old nurse. At the time, he was already dating someone else, but quickly fell for Aiko. They moved in together, and Aiko soon became pregnant. Despite this, he continued seeing his previous girlfriend, only ending things when he was forced to marry Aiko due to the pregnancy. Even after getting a high-paying hospital job, Nomoto struggled financially. He had made risky investments, buying 3 properties in Kobe and Osaka, leading to massive debt. Aiko, determined to help, took on extra jobs, working as a nurse during the day and as a karaoke hostess at night. She made sacrifices to support their family, but then she discovered the real reason behind their money problems: her husband's affairs. Nomoto had been cheating on her with multiple nurses at his hospital. He even gave one mistress a key to his apartment, and he had bought properties as gifts for his lovers. When Aiko found out, she was devastated. She had worked so hard for nothing. Enraged, she demanded a divorce, asking for a $1 million settlement and $10,000 per month in child support. Nomoto begged her to stay, promising to change, and she gave him another chance. But he didn't stop. Even after their second child was born, he continued to have affairs. Aiko, not wanting to break up the family, made a shocking compromise. She allowed him to see other women as long as he stayed home at night, spent weekends with the family, and treated her with the same love as his mistresses. But even this wasn't enough for Nomoto. Aiko's patience finally ran out, and she stopped helping him pay his debts. She started spending her money only on her children and herself. On October 29th, after yet another argument over his cheating, Aiko grabbed a knife and wrapped a rope around her own neck, threatening to take her own life. She told Nomoto she would expose his affairs to everyone at his hospital. Fearing his career would be ruined, he panicked. Instead of calming her down, he grabbed the rope and pulled as hard as he could. Aiko tried to fight back, but he covered her nose and mouth until she stopped breathing. Then he turned to their children. He later claimed he didn't want them to grow up knowing their father was a killer, so he took their lives too. After killing his family, Nomoto went to work as if nothing had happened. That night, he stuffed their bodies into plastic bags, placed them in his car, and drove off. But before dumping them, he stopped at a strip club and a brothel, as if celebrating. Only after that did he drive to the harbor, weigh the bodies down with rocks, and throw them into the sea. The next day, he acted normal, even planning a trip to Hokkaido with a mistress. To cover his tracks, he filed a missing persons report for Aiko and the children, believing their bodies would never be found. But his plan failed when the bodies surfaced. During his trial, Nomoto claimed the murders were spontaneous. However, evidence suggested otherwise. A forensic report found a piece of undigested chocolate in his infant son's stomach. Since chocolate melts quickly in the stomach, this suggested the child had eaten it just an hour before his death. But Nomoto had claimed he killed his children right after Aiko, which didn't match the timeline. A friend of Aiko's also testified that she saw the baby eating chocolate at 7:30 p.m. on October 28th, the night before the murders. This raised doubts about Nomoto's version of events. Did he kill them at a different time? Had he planned the murders in advance? Ultimately, Dr. Iwao Nomoto was found guilty of the murders.